Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad you're with us on this rather warm July morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. And I just love the heat. You know, you have to pay extra when you go to a sauna. Not anymore. Just throw a bucket of water out there and you're steaming and sweating. And I just love that. How about you, Mike?
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
I sun better than you though, so I mean, the I can go outside in the heat and not. Never mind. Go
Yeah, no, yeah, that's true. I am like a fork in a microwave. Lots of
ahead.
sparks, plenty of pain.
I know.
And I'm proud of that because my heritage is Scottish. I don't know if you knew that or not, but
I
McDonald
did know that.
is a Scottish
Yeah,
name.
yeah.
Now, our topic today, though, I got to tell you, Mike, has got me a little bit steamed uh, for kind of a funny reason. You know, I understand the market. I understand how things go sometimes up and down, but you know, I am a little bothered because I know someone's playing with us. Someone is doing a little shenanigans, and that's making me mad. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and call up that PowerPoint presentation. Today's topic is on the war on housing. You may say, what? War on housing? Here's the truth. There is a movement that I don't think I was entirely aware of. Now, I always assumed that we're having a housing crisis. We need to have more housing available, sometimes more affordable housing available for people. And I think, you know, that's terrific. The problem is, I thought the reason they're not building more housing is for a very good reason. Well, the truth is, there is actually a movement against having single-family homes and building any kind of multifamily homes. And this is going to hurt our clients because, you see, ultimately our clients are benefited when they are finding there are places where people are going and growing in communities. Now, it's happening. There are new places in the United States that are showing very, very good growth. But there are places that are not, that have a lot of people, and I'm trying to figure out what happened here. Now, here's something I want you to understand. When trying to find the best place to practice, the place with the highest percent of single-family dwelling units might be the key. Now, an SFDU is what they use to abbreviate this, and that means a single-family dwelling unit home. Now, here's what I've been finding out. There's a lot of talk against them in big cities, particularly in cities that are, how do I put this, have a liberal bias to them. The blue states, if you will. They don't like single-family homes, and they don't like them for funny reasons. One of them is there's a bias that somehow they're not friendly to the environment. Now, I have to tell you something. The latest research shows that that's not true. That because of the green space that goes around a single-family home, actually, there's a better utilization of carbon dioxide and other pollutants. Global warming actually doesn't occur in those places. So what is really going on? Okay, now let me step back and explain why I think if you find a practice site that has a large number of single-family dwelling units, no matter how big or small, you're better off. For one thing, the values of homes tends to increase. That's a long-term trend. Oh yes, I know 2008, the bottom fell out of the housing market, primarily because of subprime loaning, the loans that banks were making and kind of sticking it to the government to pay for, and bad things happened. But as a general rule, homes become more and more valuable. But there's another fact that I think is important for doctors to know. The population per home is high, and it tends to grow. So a lot more people tend to live in a single-family home than in apartments. That's not only true of children, but it's true for older adults. When you find, and there's a trend in the United States in some very densely populated places where there are people who are renting out rooms or having their basements or additional bedrooms going out to people who can rent them, and they're using this as a source of revenue. This only happens in a single-family dwelling. Doesn't so much happen in apartments. The population net worth increases. So in other words, people who own a home have more stuff. And it's not just a matter of it staying level, it actually increases. So the value that you attain as the equity in your home goes up means the net worth for the individuals there increases. That's a good thing for doctors to be in an area where people are making more and more money. Next, credit worthiness increases. So in other words, if you've got a FICO score that is 500, you're probably not going to be in a home, but people who have homes almost always are bumped up because the utilization of their assets increases. So their credit worthiness is good, and that extends to people paying for their health care or other things that professionals are selling. The fertility rate increases. And I know some people are saying, Scott, you are so crazy about kids. Well, I live in Utah. It is true. But ultimately, practices that find themselves in locations that have an increasing fertility rate, more kids, and I'm talking about in all age cohorts. By the way, the age cohorts with children is usually 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and 10 to 14. Those are the age cohorts, and they all go up when you have single-family homes. Business properties that are near single-family dwellings also tend to increase in value. Now, the big news this week is about Baltimore and how Donald Trump just hates everybody in Baltimore. Well, that's not really true, but it is true that the reason that the businesses in Baltimore and the value of homes is not increasing is because they put a huge tax on buying and increasing the value of single-family homes. Nobody wants to talk about that, but that is a fact of what's going on in that area. It happened in Detroit as well. So with Baltimore and Detroit kind of leading the way, guys, it is desperate. And business properties don't do well when single-family dwellings are absent. Last, favorable measures of demographic character occur. So not only are people making more money, more creditworthy, have more people per house, this is going to be terrible, but people with more education tend to go to single-family dwellings. And practices almost always do better when there are more single-family dwellings with people who have a higher educational attainment score. An educational attainment score is figured by all of the adults who are 25 years of age and older, and adding together how many of them have a 4-year college degree or more. When that approaches 30%, it's usually a very favorable thing for medical, dental, optometric, veterinary practices as well. Now, what is the war on homes? Now, here's the deal. Some states are making it very difficult, and in fact, they're making it artificially hard to build and to purchase homes. I didn't realize that they were doing this, but it's on the big county level. If you go to California's 5 largest counties, they're making it a nightmare to purchase. It makes them inaccessible, by the way, single-family homes to younger families. And that has a long-term negative effect upon the area that they're in. When young families can't get a home of any size because they can't afford them, well, there are some bad that makes the fertility rate artificially lower. Now, artificial fertility rate is how many children there are per woman in an area. You need a replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman to have a stable population in terms of its size. But the problem here is when the rate of the number of children goes down, there's some weird things. For instance, the age of the residents on average will go up. So you need to have younger families be able to come in because those are the ones who are going to buy the homes from people who want to retire, move it someplace else. I don't know, maybe Florida. It further lowers the chance of wealth creation. Here's a big deal. Guys, in the United States, the safest way to increase your net worth is to own a home. We have all kinds of biases that are in the laws, tax breaks, the value of the home goes up, all these other things. And frankly, owning something that appreciates, not depreciates like a car, lowers, well, it makes you better off to have something that appreciates. A car will depreciate by its nature. Same thing with a computer. We need to give young people a chance to own an asset that gets more valuable. That's where I'm saying by not doing this, you're hurting the next generation. Now, here's the result of not having more single-family dwellings that are moving along or being built that younger people can afford. People get stuck in a financial rut. This, people of all age groups, by the way. When you don't have an asset that's increasing in value, you cannot gain net worth very quickly. You know that when you sell a home these days, you're often getting a capital gain that's pretty good. You take that opportunity away and you're in trouble. Now, the local populations age faster, which means as I go into locations where we don't show much growth in single-family dwelling sales, you're getting an older and older population, and they're the only ones who can afford a home. If you happen to go to a city where everybody's living in an apartment, the population doesn't really go younger either because there's so many fewer children that are added to the population. Renters are having a hard time becoming owners when this happens, and that's a bad thing. People are stuck in an apartment that may just be crappy. Now, growth is also being restricted. When you have single-family dwelling homes that are not available, it means everybody wants to go into a low-end, I should say moderately inexpensive apartment. And that just means that the number of people who can move there is reduced. Crime eventually increases, especially in urban areas where there are few people who have the benefit of owning a home and wanting to increase or improve their property. Yeah, I know all about rent control. Problem is, rent control doesn't serve anybody. And there's very little incentive for a landlord to improve a property if they can't get anything out of it. And so ultimately, it just means the housing type degrades and crime eventually increases. Residents don't get an option to own a home. And I see that as a terrible thing. I really genuinely believe that you ought to have the chance to own if you can. Housing costs in these places that are restricting artificially where these places are, where they don't allow single-family dwellings, they found that they're 250% higher on average. So if we went to San Diego, Los Angeles, Orange County, San Francisco, several places in California and other, I'm not trying to pick on them, it costs so much more. Seattle is incredibly expensive, not because nobody wants to live there, but because they will not allow the development of the greater Seattle area within the county you're not. We're seeing the same thing happen in East Coast cities, particularly in New England. So it's just making it so that what they're claiming they want to help the young and the poor get out of their situation, these public policies are hurting them. Now, there is a anti-housing attitude that exists, and I'm going to tell you the truth, it's in green populations. Those people who are in favor of the new Green Deal hate housing. Now, Kotkin and Cox are two of my favorite demographers. They're just so brilliant. And they are often appearing in newgeography.com, which is really kind of an interesting site for demographics. Publication to Green called Grist explained the political agenda of the planners of these cities. And here's what they said. A lot of green good comes from bringing fewer beings into a polluted and crowded planet. SFDUs are an enemy of the planet. Now, what they're not saying is you ought to have the freedom to do what you want, and the population should, by its nature, desire single-family homes. Look, the truth is everybody does. That is what most people desire, and I'll explain that in a second. But what they're trying to do is to say if we keep everybody crammed together, there won't be as many of us, and that's a general good. Who elected these people? I don't know. Wasn't me. Now, here's the deal. I want to help you at Dr. Demographics figure out where to go. Now, one of those key elements is we got to find places that have a larger than average population of single-family dwellings. There are several states that are doing a lot to make these homes available. And frankly, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Idaho are all doing that. Some parts of Washington, kind of. Atlanta claims that it wants to, and Florida is doing this. Guys, I am just going to tell you, if you want to find a good place to practice, let's look for places that have a moderate price of home and there's turnover in these single-family dwellings. All right, Mike, I'm just about at my time. Do you have any thoughts on this before I turn the time over to you?
You know, I think my thoughts go to the doctors that are in areas that are not pro single-family dwelling, and of course, my thoughts go to marketing and how you can deal with the situation. But I think before you ever start that strategy, that's why it's so important that you reach out and get those neighborhood demographics on your area, because it may not be as obvious as you think on what's being built, what's being planned for, and what direction the city's going. And that may impact the way that you execute your marketing in a huge way, depending on the type of housing and the attitudes of the city. Because again, you're not typically, most doctors that are working with us, they're not looking for, especially a start from scratch practice that they're going to flip in a couple years. They're looking to be there for a little while.
Right.
You're making a decision not for tomorrow, but you're making a decision from 5, 10, or 15 years from now. And so that's why that's so important to know those trends.
Well, and if you want your practice to increase in its value, you've got to look for the things that show the population is increasing in its value.
Mm-hmm.
Miracle Max 49 is our discount for July. Hurry if you want to use it, because next week it'll be gone. Gone, do you hear me? Sorry. Didn't mean to get excited.
It'll be gone by Thursday. And so, because the month ends on Wednesday, dear Scott.
Oh, that is true. So this is our July special. Guys, we may not run a special in August. I'd be honest with you. When we get really busy, I take these off. So, I don't know. Just tell your friends and neighbors if they want to do something and get a little discount. This would be the time to do it.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Mike, I want you to...
All right, Scott, as you're taking down your presentation here so I can put mine up, I'm talking today about something that, frankly, is a really important topic and one that I've gotten a lot of panic calls from in the past. And it's a topic that probably most practices have to deal with at one time or another, and that is the challenge of dealing with competition that comes to town that is discount, is low price, and they come in, they're going to undercut you, they're going to undercut everybody, and they're going to be the lowest price person in town, and then how you deal with that. And it's a very challenging time and a kind of a devastating time for a lot of you if you have not done the proper steps in preparation. It can come out of the blue and it can just slap you in the face. We're working with doctors that have contacted us recently that have seen a 50% reduction year over year on their production. And it's devastating for those practices, and they're in a situation now where they're starting to panic, as they should, because somebody has come in and undercut their prices. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I've only got 10 or so minutes, so I'm not going to go super deep into it. But from a marketer's perspective, this is really what you should be thinking of, focusing on, and preparing for. So let me ask you how many times you have said this to your patients. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. How many of you have a picture similar to this, or this is part of the pitch or the spiel that you give to people, or when you go to a school, maybe this is what you're teaching the children? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I would say that in this scenario, it's exactly the same. Those of you that are not experiencing this yet are going to at some point. And now is the time to start putting in the investments and doing the work that it's going to take, instead of having to do something drastic later on. So what is that prevention? What are those things? So the first one that I would say is neighborhood legacy building. You've got to be focused on this. You have to be investing the time in the neighborhood, in the community. The challenge is, I think, Scott, for us, is that a lot of times we have doctors that come to us and they say, put me in a place where there's no competition and it's wide open spaces and amber fields of grain and whatever, and they're going to be able to just be there with an open sign and be successful. And the truth is, very often we're able to find those spots for those doctors, and they put their practice there. and they thrive for a couple years until somebody comes to town. And oftentimes what's coming to town today are DSOs or big corporate practices that come to town and they open it up and they immediately go to discount. They immediately go to price. And so all of a sudden that doctor is caught completely off guard because they did not put in that legacy work in those neighborhoods to truly build those relationships and, frankly, loyalty. And that's the second thing with their patients. You have to invest in loyalty. You have to invest in your patients being able to see you, experience your practice in a way that it feels like their family. And those doctors that have not focused on loyalty and have just been straight clinicians, and it's just like going to Jiffy Lube for an oil change, there's no relationship there. For those doctors that have done that, they tend to find that their patients are not as loyal. And so they will jump ship very, very quickly when they are enticed by something else. The next thing that's so important that, man, there's just so few doctors that do this very well is they have not established a slow drip message over the long term, meaning that they need to have their messaging, their primary focus, their unique selling position, and they need to continue to be dripping that on the local community over the long term. And I'm talking years. Even if you're in a situation where you don't need to be doing any coupons or specials or promotions or whatever, you still need to be marketing. You still need to be public. You still need to be focusing on that loyalty, focusing on that legacy building in those neighborhoods that you're serving. Because if you don't, and you're not slowly dripping that over the long term, when somebody new comes to town, they just seem nice, new, and shiny, and you're going to lose patients if you haven't done that. So the key is really to be PR minded with your practice. And again, this goes back to not thinking always just like a clinician, but you need to be thinking like a business owner. You need to be thinking like a marketer all the time. You need to be really understanding the reality that, quite frankly, there will always be people in every area, across every neighborhood, who will choose the cheapest option. And it doesn't matter if you go to a low-income area or if you go to a really high-income area or a very well-established area that doesn't have a lot of churn or an area that has really high churn with a lot of renter rates. There will always be a percentage of the people that are going to go to the cheapest option. And quite frankly, there's not a lot that you can do about that except for be the cheapest option. And frankly, a lot of doctors fall into this trap. And that's why we call it a race to the bottom, because they will you'll get undercut with your prices. Then you'll go in and undercut them, and then they undercut you. And it's just a race to the bottom, to the point where you're basically working for nothing. And you're not making any profit just because you're trying to be the cheapest in town to get those patients. It's not something that's sustainable. It's not something that you will ever be able to compete with over the long term with these big corporate practices, with these practices that come in to be the cheapest option. And quite frankly, there's a lot of private practices that come to town and they decide that that's what they're going to do because that's the easiest thing to do, right? They don't have to be necessarily good. They don't have to have the best staff or the prettiest weight room or anything like that. But if they're the cheapest in town, you know that they're going to always get a segment of the population that's going to go to their practice. But I have a feeling that if you're watching this, if you've worked with us in the past, that's probably not who you are and probably not the type of practice that you're trying to build. So let's talk about here in a few minutes what to do in an emergency when you're in that situation. Now, this is assuming that you've not done a very good job on that prevention portion, because if you've done a good job on that prevention portion, you probably are not going to feel the impact. Yes, you're going to lose some that are going to go to that cheapest option, but you're not going to have these major slashes in your production totals throughout the year because you've done that prevention. But let's assume you're part of the 96% that don't focus on the prevention, but now you're in an emergency. Let's talk about what you need to do in that situation. The first thing you need to do is really understand and establish what ammo you have that's available to you. Do you have a lot of reviews? Do you have money for advertising? Do you have established relationships in the community? You need to step back And maybe you even need to have somebody that's a third-party consultant look at and answer this question for you. What is your best opportunity to go to the market and deliver a message? And hopefully you've got something, right? Hopefully you've not been totally passive, but you need to work whatever angle is going to be the best for you. Again, because a lot of times these new practices that come to town, they don't have reviews. A lot of times, if they're a private practice, they don't have money for ads. They certainly don't have established relationships. If you have those things, those are angles that you can work. The next thing is immediately you need to become highly visible to the community, meaning that you need to be pumping money into Facebook advertising. You need to have your face and your staff, everybody wearing the practice t-shirt at community events. You need to be throwing patient parties. You need to maybe redo your sign. You need to be super, super visible to the community and as quickly as you can. Good thing about Facebook ads is if you listen to this today, here in about 2 hours, you could have your Facebook ads up there and have every man, woman, child, and pet dog know your face, know your practice, and know exactly what you do that quick. That's a fantastic tool, and frankly, it doesn't cost that much money. And so that's something you need to do, and you need to do it fast, and you need to be committed to that process. Now, the third thing is I always recommend do not lower your prices. Do not go for a race to the bottom. It's really difficult to recover from. And once you lower your prices, especially if you're in an area that does not have a lot of churn, you've done two things. You've convinced your existing patients that you've been overcharging them all this time, and you will never be able to recover and then raise your prices within a reasonable amount of time. And so I always recommend do not fall to the trap of lowering your prices with those people. And here's the key. Patience. Patience is key. These practices almost always will, if they're a new doctor and they just didn't get good marketing advice and they just went in at the cheapest in town, they will really pretty quickly find out that that's not the right thing, and then they're going to have to go through the hurt of raising their prices. If they're a DSO, if they're a big corporate practice and they just have the volume to be able to have low dollars, typically they kind of weed themselves out through reviews. Usually because they have those low prices, they usually have a rotating door when it comes to doctors, and the public reputation usually suffers within usually about 2 or 3 years. And so within 2 or 3 years, usually that practice is going to position itself as the cheapest, but also one of the poorer reviewed practices in the area. And that will put you in a position where you will be able to then market to those patients the other 80% that are not going to fall for the cheapest in town a message, and you can really make some focus and be successful with them. Now, if this made sense to you, if this is stuff that you feel like you're struggling with in your practice, or hopefully you're in a situation where this hasn't happened yet, but you're wanting to prepare yourself for that to happen, take advantage of the resources we have at Dr. Demographics and the Dental Practice Insiders, frankly. We have a tremendous amount, obviously, of demographic information that can help you understand the most part of your community and understand the psychographic value of the people that are not going to be swayed by the cheapest in town. But again, you have to be able to talk to those people in an effective way, and we can show you how to do that. You can reach out to me at mike@drdemographics.com. With that, Scott, what say you? I always have a comment or two on what I have to say.
I always do, because frankly, you're just imperfect, Mike, except for the hair,
Yeah, sure.
Now, seriously though, what you're saying, I think, makes a tremendous amount of sense. I want to just say something though that it brings to mind. You might notice our webinars are a little different than others, and it's because we're not devoting ourselves trying to get you to buy something. We genuinely are trying to share with you the facts that we're seeing that are important for you in your decision-making process. So I always thought it was better to actually give you something and then have you consider, how's that going to help me? So that you'll know that we know what we're talking about. We're actually giving you facts about what's going on. Mike is a brilliant marketer, and he really understands the fundamentals, but he's not one of the flowery guys who has been pampered in his life. He actually has had a working living. My gosh.
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Show them your fingernails, Mike, because
Yeah.
that's
like my prison tattoos that I have under my shirt, or what are you saying?
If you wanted to share that with us, I'm sure everybody would be entertained.
Oh, that's funny.
But anyway, seriously, I want you to know I kind of value that. And if we can help you, please don't hesitate to let us know. We're doing right now a lot of telephone consultations as people are getting ready for their full decisions on where they want to practice and whether the practices that they're considering for sale are worth it. That's what our job is. We're supposed to give you the information you need. Not just tell you what you want to hear, but give you the facts on the ground. So everybody, thank you so much. Mike, thank you for just a wonderful session. You're just remarkable.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that.
Don't let it go to your head.
I won't.
All right.
We'll see you next week.
Take care then. Bye-bye.